Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Sebastian.
Hello.
Dude, the man with the best name in the business, brother. I'm telling you, that name, see, that's my middle name. People are going to call me Bass, but I was like, yeah, you could have called
Bass.
me
Yeah.
that instead of Robbie. Like, come on now.
Bass. I've never been called that, apart from by a Chinese Qigong teacher, which is very funny. He's like, come on, Bass, because he couldn't pronounce it. But
Well,
actually, it's quite cool because it is the Egyptian cat god. So, there is that in there.
look at that. You can relate to a cat god. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Sebastian, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, man?
Well, there is a segue there, unintentionally, but my interest has been in the kind of like overlap between psychedelics and mystical experiences and religion broadly. And actually, some of my early experiences, just spontaneously, were very Egyptian. So I had a whole load of imagery. And so I got really interested in the Egyptian religion. So I started researching into that a little bit more deeply. I'd been to Egypt when I was young, but hadn't really taken it all in. And it was a revelation about how much kind of like insight and depth and wisdom there is in there, the different kind of gods. And so basically I used that at the beginning to begin to build a kind of psychological system using some of the Egyptian ideas. And that's kind of how I started basically building this system, which is designed to facilitate psychedelic experiences in a kind of mystical context. So kind of like using mantras, using different meditations to orient people, to kind of frame the experience, to help guide, to have a positive experience. And yeah, it's all there. So like there's a line from Egypt to Greece to, it all merges together, the mystery traditions through the Israelites and then the Christian tradition. So I ended up with Christianity, but it's this kind of like adventure of syncretism, of finding how all these things connect together and how maybe they're all rooted ultimately in psychedelic experience. The basic original religion of humanity was shamanism with altered states.
The funniest thing is like what I've been hearing a lot recently is people are looking through like the Bible and picking out certain scriptures or texts and being like, it might be a psychedelics. Like they talk about the acacia tree, the burning bush
That's
that
right,
moves.
yeah.
So I'm wondering how much of, did it take you psychedelics? Like, did it take you taking them to be able to kind of analyze this? Because I've always said I've never tried psychedelics, but I've seen the benefit in a lot of people. Every story and experience I've ever heard from people have been talking about how it kind of ripped down the fabric of this like walls that we've built up mentally to kind of bring them to a path or a route that has seen what they truly want or what they truly need to be doing, such as like all our ideas like money, morals, all these types of things that we develop through life.
Yeah.
It kind of come clear in an aspect of things. Like I know a lot of people talk about like money turns out to them like after a psychedelic experience, they realize the bullshit in it. Like a
Yeah.
lot of it, the fakeness kind of seems like that. Like let's say like life, for example, when you're going through it, it's kind of like constantly putting like mud on you, like all just throwing mud at you, every little thing, every little
Yeah.
detail. And then once you take psychedelics, it's like a shower, just wipes all that away from you, which really brings into the aspect of like life, brings into the aspect of time, brings into all these things that we have kind of made and
Yeah.
totally kind of chosen to neglect into a more serious fashion where you can be like, oh my God, like I'm not being myself. I'm not being me. I'm not being the person that I'm supposed to be, the one I feel inside here. Instead, I'm being the one that's being forced onto me by society.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a very important and common insight that people have. That's kind of like the turn inwards, you could say, where you're kind of like coasting along life, generally just following like what people say and just living the life that you're meant to live. But, it's a very, very contemplative, introspective process, which is why it's, similar to kind of mystical traditions where that's what it's all about. It's like know thyself. That's the essence of the whole thing. And it's a kind of lifetime's journey. But it's interesting. You mentioned some of these things that people commonly talk about that helps them to wipe away, and it does feel like the more experience you have with it, you understand how there are layers. So there's the immediate layer of your own personal issues, your relationships, things that you've done wrong that you could correct. You've got this kind of moral layer of like kind of remorse and understanding, you know, things that you need to make right. Then you've got this layer of understanding the society that you're in, of kind of insights about how of the structure of society, about you know, whether it's, yeah, from your family to your community to the country to the world, this kind of thing. So you start to understand that. And then beyond that, then as you get to deeper levels, you get to the more kind of philosophical, mystical, cosmic kind of things about the nature of reality, time, all of these things. You know, obviously the higher the dose, you know, heroic doses will take you like way beyond, you know,
to the ends of the universe, I'd
yeah,
say.
complete, where you come back and you could, you know, often can't make sense of it, like it's too much, you know, sometimes it's too much. But there are definitely those gradations, and I think that a lot of the work is being able to identify and to see how those interpenetrate and connect, and to basically have a kind of much more, let's say, thick understanding of reality. Like it's layered, it's textured. It's not just this flat land that we're kind of like kind of been taught to live in.
What
You know
was
what I mean?
what was your experience like? Like, how did it had to be something so impactful to bring you to the point where you would mix the two of Christianity and psychedelics together? Because I feel like that's how it initially started. Like religions were this experience. Like Native Americans would take peyote or take some type of massive psychedelic, and they would have these group highs where they would see like spirit animals, and they would see, you know, they would have these trips that it's like the Simpsons movie where like he
Yeah,
takes the freaking drug and then he starts seeing everything get ripped down and showing him his true
yeah.
self, and they start putting them back together after they've taken them apart. But then we've lost that with like the way, like I hear so many people like, I mean, if from all the people I've met that are diehard Christians, they would beat you with a Bible if you said, you know, Christ and psychedelic mushrooms were related. It's like more on the aspect, I feel like man has changed religion so much from what it used to be back in the day, where I mean, Vikings took fly algaric mushrooms. So many societies were taking mushrooms and having these experiences that would really bring in clarity to their own life and truly what they wanted, things that they would go after and sought after. And it seems like now religion tells you don't do that, it's bad for you, or all these types of things. And it's not really the religion saying that, it's the people that are kind of teaching it. And it's like there's a whole nother world that we're truly losing aspect between ourselves. I mean, so many people pray to God to try and find themselves. That's why there is this kind of plant and there is this kind of thing out there to be able to help you get there, because a lot of people can't do the meditation. They can't sit there and do the hums and the praise and hope that a message gets sent to their way or something comes across their path to where they can change their ways. But that plant, that drug, whatever you want to call it, is there for when you take it. It's helping you get to that point to where you can
Mm,
notice that. Because I don't think I would ever be able, I mean, it's taken me forever to be able to think in a perspective that it might be something more than, you know, something else. And that's
mhm.
on the aspect of hearing so many people's stories where, you know, I talked to a guy named Dr. Tran. He is a medical doctor, spent so many years, you know, studying all these types of things to be a doctor at the age of 30. And the next thing you know, he was like, I took LSD, took mushrooms, and he goes, everything around me, like my relationship, everything just melted away. And I was just floating in this empty void where I was starting to realize everything that has been sent my way has been a construct of somebody else's ideas, somebody else, my parents' vision for me. And it's like, you hear something like that, it makes you look at that thing like, why the fuck is it still illegal? You know what I mean?
Well, that probably explains why it's illegal, because in a way that's a dangerous thing, you know. And like you can understand how kind of religious authorities or kind of like political, social leaders, you know, they're terrified of that, because can you imagine? I mean, that was the basic scare in the 60s with the whole kind of like, you know, the drug war, was partly because it was kind of identified with a counterculture, which was a lot about that, and you know, wrapped up in America with the Vietnam War and all this kind of stuff. And it was like, why are we going to go? Why are we going to go and fight and die in this meaningless? So it was kind of the whole turn against it was a fear of basically people rebelling and you know, and turning on, tuning in, dropping out, and that, you know, that could be the end of society as we know it. So there is a real fear there, and maybe partly a legitimate fear on a social level, but also on a psychological level, because that kind of deconstruction, that breaking down of all these structures of your own identity, of your own self, of where you are and where you live, that can also happen on such an intense personal level that some people might struggle to piece themselves back together, you know.
That's why a
Homer
lot of people
got
that
put
try
back together.
is that why a lot of people that try like acid or mushrooms, there's like a rare chance that you could develop like severe schizophrenia from it. Like I wouldn't say that's the trip doing that, like installing that into you. I feel like if you do suffer from something like that, it's probably
Yeah,
lying dormant, and then that thing
yeah,
just brings it out of you.
of course. I mean, that's there's been a lot of research done into that and the kind of risks and the dangers of taking different psychedelics and, you know, mushrooms, psilocybin, and all the rest of it. And actually, they found that the risk is much lower than the perceived risk that people have, you know, but it's always there. And like, you can't, you know, you'd be stupid to kind of take something like that without having an element of anxiety around that, you know, oh my God, maybe I do have an underlying condition that I'm not aware of, whatever. It is low risk, and obviously if you haven't been diagnosed with that, it's obviously much lower. But you know, you will, in the kind of, obviously in the ceremonial context and the way that it's being administered now in a serious way therapeutically, obviously they have to have very clear contraindications of the people that do take it. And so then obviously if you have certain, you know, mental conditions and all the rest of it, maybe they will say, actually this isn't a good idea, or, you know, microdose or whatever. So, but, you know, everything carries a risk. And that's the other thing, you know, that sometimes the great transformative things are those that you just have to take that risk. And maybe part of the problem with our modern culture is that it is actually so risk averse, and that, you know, kind of everything has to be, you know, clean cut and safe and had all these trials and the rest of it. And then what do you get? You end up with an opioid crisis, because the only thing that people trust is the medical establishment that dispenses all these clean little pills in clean little boxes. But if you take a bowl of like seething brown stinky mush that kind of makes you retch as soon as you take it, that, you know what I mean, taken from the vines of the you know, the trees in the Amazon, then it's like, oh no, that's dirty, that's, do you know what I mean? So that there is also that kind of issue that we have as in the modern West, of this kind of like this hygiene kind of obsession.
Yeah.
And even mental hygiene, that we don't if you don't take the risk, you're not going to get the benefit. I mean, it's always been the way in life.
Would you say the risk is very minimal compared to the elevated experience that you've had that's brought you to where you're at today?
For sure. I mean, also, I can only speak for myself. I've had like very, very intense experiences, positive and negative. And this is an interesting thing as well. In a way, I'm glad that I had the negative ones. And I've been to places where I did fear for my sanity, you know, that maybe I would never come back. Maybe that, you know, that was it. Now I'd broken my brain or whatever, you know, or very, very frightening places. But I did come back. And in a way that kind of showed me that the limits of my capacities are way, 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 way broader than I thought. That, you know, that in a way we maybe underestimate ourselves and think that we can only capable of so much. It's the same with physical things. You know, you think you know you can only, you know, walk up like that hill, and then you end up kind of going up like, you know, 3 mountains. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And another interesting point is that a lot of people I've talked to who also have had negative experiences, kind of like painful, really dark, bad trips, basically. Almost 99% say that they're really, really grateful for that experience. That kind of really, they learned so much from it, and actually they came out better, even though it was difficult and painful.
What was your if I could ask, what was your worst experience on it? And then can I hear your best experience, like one that kind of, you know, solidified, like it's a hit or miss type scenario?
Okay, so I actually describe these in my book at the beginning of the book. So I tried to start the book off with this experiential thing, so to set in a way the two, and actually it neatly lines up with Aldous Huxley's kind of theory, which I talk about in Heaven and Hell. So they were experiences of heaven and hell, basically. So the hell one, I'll describe it briefly, was came first in my teens, was it, or early 20s, and that was basically an all-night rave in Wales. So I live in London, so it took a few hours to get there. It was a coach trip. We were all kind of like these raver party heads, smoking all the way. So I was completely stoned when I arrived. Kind of arrived in this strange place, you know, in the middle of the night with a couple of friends. Didn't know anybody else. It was a massive mansion with a massive party with all different, you know, rooms and everything else. Instantly offered ecstasy, LSD, took a microdot, which is very strong, and some ecstasy. Anyway, it at a certain point in the party when I was on a dance floor, very off my head, something snapped. It was almost like there was a moment in my head where something snapped. I had some weird altercation with a guy on the dance floor who I hallucinated as a kind of clown kind of thing, and it kind of went wrong, and something in my brain, it was like it shattered, like a plate splintering, something like that. And then from that point, the whole night, it was an all night thing, was this kind of like ever tightening kind of screw of what, with hindsight, I realized was hyper rationality, because I was basically trying to desperately for my brain to make sense of what was real and what was not, because I was hallucinating so much. And also everyone around me was off their base. So they were all acting very weird. And they, you know, and they so there's a lot of paranoia. And it was very much like, I don't know if you know The Trial by Franz Kafka.
No.
The story, no? Okay, it's an amazing novel, and it was actually made into a screenplay by Harold Pinter. So there's a film of it with Kay from Twin Peaks. You might be too young for all of this.
Probably.
You know Twin Peaks?
Yeah, might be a little too young.
Never mind. Anyway, that when I saw that, it was like, that's it. That's exactly my trip. It was almost like word by word. So then I realized that this was some kind of universal psychotic state that I got into. That followed a certain pattern, and it did feel like you're getting tighter and tighter and kind of spiral into the center of some great revelation. It was like the basic idea is that you're looking for absolution from the law. So I was looking for the law in the trial. It's called the law. You're on trial,
yeah.
And you want to get to the law to actually find out ultimately what have you done wrong, because you've been you've been accused of some terrible crime. You don't know what it is, and you need to find out what it is, what's wrong. And
kind of like in Egypt, for instance, like when they weigh your decisions in life to see if you go to the good place or the bad place, they weigh it in it's like a court type thing to get the.
That's right. Yeah, but it's not quite like that. It's just about you're just trying to find the truth in my case, or trying to find what, so you're trying to get to the core of what of reality of what's going on, but you can't. And every time something weird happens, you get swung in. Anyway, in the end, at the middle of the whole thing, this is the climax of the experience, I suddenly realized I'm going to die. This is leading to my death. I'm going to basically orchestrate my own death. And basically at the end, I met the devil. So it's almost like I'd gone down through the rings of hell, and I met the devil. And basically he offered me my last cigarette, which was very, very kind of him. He was this like tall black guy. We were sitting out in front of the thing. The sun was coming up. He said, "Do you want a cigarette?" That's all he said. And for me, it was like, this is the last cigarette before my execution, kind of thing. So then I was talking to this guy, just like waiting, and it's like, and he kept just like going on about other stuff, and it's like, get on with it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then suddenly he started saying something about being black, and then suddenly I realized this is a black guy who's just off his head as well, and he's a bit paranoid about being black. It's like, oh, maybe it's not the devil. Anyway, that it went on from there. It was crazy. I should have gone for a walk in the countryside, but I still thought, if I do that, people are going to kill me and throw me in a lake. It was at that level of paranoia.
Do you think that a lot of that, like you said, like everybody else was tripping around you and you were like, why is everybody acting weird? Do you think that might be like a sign of like the idea of trying to maintain because you're in public, like it's like a psychological thing of like I need to make sure people know I'm not high or trying, but it would
Yeah,
be
yeah, yeah.
difficult because everybody else is kind of off their rocker too. So you're like,
Exactly.
what's wrong
Yeah.
with these people, you know?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. It's this desperate attempt to keep control, to keep control of what's going on, and for yourself to keep control of yourself. The one point that snapped me out of it was when my friend, who I finally found at the end, I said to him, you know, I don't know, I don't know what's real anymore. I've no fucking idea. It's like, what can I do? I'm like, you know, and he said, just accept it. You're fucked. You're fucked. And when he said that, accept it, you have no idea, it was like, oh, thank God, I can just relax. I don't need to work it out. And as soon as I gave up, basically, then everything started to calm down. And
Yeah.
then it came out of it. So that
It's
was interesting.
it's crazy because I got that on weed when I remember smoking so much and I'd be so paranoid, like, oh my God, they know I'm high, they know I'm high, they know I'm high. But then I would see like my friend or something, he'd go in a store like it was nothing, like he just wouldn't have a thought in the world. And I'm like, how are you managing to do this without like, getting stuck in the thing when you're high? He's like, dude, he's like, once you start worrying about other people that kind of look at you like, are what's wrong with this person? What's wrong with this? You're worried about trying to what is normal, then you lose your sense of being normal. You lose your sense of who
Mm-hmm.
you are. It's like you're caring way too much about what other people think of you. And it's like this
Mm,
great message into life for me, which was like
mm,
everybody every day goes out into
yeah,
the world and displays an image that they're not their true selves. And I think
yeah,
that's kind of like the same thing you can relate with on the mush or when you were like kind
yeah,
of feeling awkward around everybody was we're paying way too much attention to what
yeah,
others perceive of us
yeah, yeah,
rather
yeah.
than how we perceive ourselves, which is a
Exactly.
fucking deep message that'll hit you and it'll shake a lot of people. I mean, I don't think a lot of
Yeah,
people are ready for that. I think that's a main reason why a lot of this stuff is like that,
yeah, yeah.
because that's a
I
big
mean,
come to grips, life changing moment.
it's massive. Yeah. I mean, in a way, that's basically it because what, you know, comparing it with the heaven experience, basically you could say that the whole hellish thing is all about you because that kind of paranoid delusional state is that everything that happens is related to you somehow. So whatever happens, your brain is in overdrive, kind of like reading the messages and what are they saying to me? So you're kind of like the center of the universe, everything. So this massive, it's like dense ego kind of thing. And I talked about this about later in the book as well, about basically there's three levels of ego that you're talking about, the middle one, which is the me. So the outer one is mine. So basically to do with all the things you identify with, all your possessions, all that kind of stuff, you know, even your name, Sebastian or whatever, you know, these are the things that all the possessions all together is what makes you you. Yeah.
Yeah.
That can kind of like that can hold you down because, you know, as much those things control you as much as you control them in a sense. One level deeper than that is me, which is the me as an object of the, let's say, the gaze of the other, let's say. So when you get self-conscious about people looking at you and like, what do they think of me, and all that kind of social kind of image that you project to the world, that's when you basically do this kind of like double turn of your consciousness. So you turn it out and look at yourself from the outside to the me as a thing. So, you know, and that's self-consciousness, which can go out of control as well. And then the inner one is the I, which is just basically more intimate sense of yourself as a kind of subject. Anyway, I think that, you know, the long and short of it is it's an intensification of ego, and the whole of the world kind of revolves around you, and you can't escape that. And when it gets kind of, you know, demonic, then it's all about these demonic powers that kind of like doing things, and that you're kind of communicating in all these kind of telepathic ways and all that kind of shit, and you're fully on the paranoia. Whereas the heaven experience is the opposite.
What was the heaven experience?
So the heaven is where you lose the ego completely. So instead of everything contracting around you and it's like you're a black hole pulling everything in, it's like you've gone, and then everything expands out, and all there is the world. So you don't, so you're just, it's kind of non-dual, they call it, where there's no separation between self and other, because you're gone. So that you're basically, you are everything around you. I mean, this one, talk about taking psychedelics safely. The first one was bad set and setting, as they call it, which is your mindset. If you're in a bad state of frame of mind and the setting isn't like safe and cool, you don't feel comfortable, then you tend to spin out in that way that I did. My heaven experience was in the summer. It was a beautiful day. I was with some friends. We were walking along a river in Oxford. And yeah, and basically I went through a kind of meditation on the water, which looking at, which is weird. And that was again, it was like a click, in the same way that I had a kind of like moment of something snapped with the hell one. It was the same with the heaven one. Something clicked. I was meditating, looking at the water for ages, or the sun, patterns of the sun on the water. I was hallucinating, basically. Again, Egyptian imagery. I was seeing loads of different things on the water. Then I started philosophizing about reality. So I was basically thinking about the whole patterns on the surface of the water as being the surface reality that we project onto. So then I was asking myself, what is real then? And then I basically started thinking, well, the water is real. The body of water, the river itself is real. The surface patterns is an illusion. It's not real, but the water's real. And then when I realized, but the surface patterns is the water, it's the same thing, then it was a eureka moment. It's like, again, that click. Then I looked up and the whole world was completely transformed. And time stopped, my mind stopped. I was, the non-dual reality. Afterwards, when I researched it, it was a classic mystical experience that you can read, that many people have without psychedelics. But it's basically a religious experience.
Kind of like the world, we obviously know the world is spinning right now, but we're not feeling it because we're kind of locked into our own little flow. But like at that moment when you literally, you felt yourself click in, and the world, you were turning with it. So now you're synced. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right now we're all kind of on our own separate little paths, which is why I feel like that's why our days are so filled with our own egos, our own life, our own things that we have to do. I have to go get gas. I got to pay bills. I got to go to work.
Yeah.
I got to get groceries. But then once you like snap into this, like, oh my God, there's a lot more going on than myself. It's this realization moment that I feel like you get locked into the world, which once you hit that, you know what that's like, but you can also lose that sometimes. Like, I mean, there are some days I'll walk out, won't even think about how beautiful the sky is. I'll go right into my car, drive straight to the grocery store, go home. I'll just be in my house, whatever, just neglecting every other thing around me besides what I want to do, like play video games or something. But then when I'm outside and I'm at work and I'm like, I go outside, take like a breath or something, get that nice cold air hitting my lungs or something. It snaps me into the sync where I'm like, there are fucking birds chirping. There are things, there's a rhythm to the universe right now. And it's everything is making its own beat and pattern that are syncing together perfectly. But we're neglecting that because on the basis of our own egos, our own emotions, all these things, they talk about the Four Horsemen. There's a Four Horsemen, I believe, that's different for everybody. And it's all inside of ourselves. It's a constant war of who we are as people, trying to find out how to get this or how to get that. What are other people going to think of me? All built up by society. I mean, when I came across your profile and I saw like, well, he's linking religion with psychedelics, I was like, that's so interesting because this isn't the first time that someone has came across this before. Like there was an old experiment called the Marsh Chapel experiment where they gave priests like mushrooms and drugs to take. And the church was like, wait, they're questioning things. And it's funny because there's a video where they had missionaries take LSD. And in the first 20 minutes, these guys, you could tell they're trying to stay sober and they're kind of tripping into it. They're like, they're doing the adjustments. They're like, hold on, we're on camera. They're trying to fix themselves to act like how they're supposed to act by what the church wants them to act. And then eventually they just start like asking questions like, what is God? God isn't a being. God is around us. This is God. And it's like this whole entire question. And one of them came out to be gay. Like the other guy was like, draw a picture of something. And he started drawing a bunch of dicks. And he's like, it's a joke. And then they're like, is it a joke though? And he goes, secretly, no, it's not. I'm actually fighting something inside of myself. And I'm like, it opens up those doorways. It opens up this thing that we're suppressing, we're putting down. And I believe it's got to be an amazing experience from what I've heard from so many people. I don't think I'm at that stage where I can take it because I can barely handle weed, but I love hearing how people have gotten to the point where they've had those bad trips. I know a friend of mine that forces the bad trips because he's like, that's where I learned the most. And I'm like,
Mm.
but you're scaring yourself to death. And he's like, man, he goes, every time I come out of that, it shows me everything that I was like. It turns out it wasn't as bad as you thought it was. But in that moment, it scares you because it's showing you how far off track you are from where you feel like you should be.
That's true, but there is a danger in that as well, I think, because
Yeah.
for sure, like especially if you start to like that, because after that experience, I had my bad experience. My worldview kind of shifted for quite a while. You know, it took me a long time to recover from that, where I started having this kind of Gnostic vision of reality, where there's good and evil forces, and and I could see how someone who kind of got lost in that and maybe ended up being sectioned and going to a mental institute, would see everything in, and they when they write reports about their how they see the world, it's very like that, and in a way it is a religious worldview, but it's a kind of it's a dark worldview, of all these sinister energies and forces and all this strange, huge, complicated, convoluted kind of stuff that you can read with, like the early Gnostics and the early Christian church as well. They had a lot of this, which it may well be connected to them taking their psychedelics and having their bad trips as well, because there is an argument. This guy, I don't know if you've heard of Brian Murarescu. He's
Haven't
written a
heard of
book
him.
recently. He was on Joe Rogan, actually, so that's funny that you mentioned that. Recently with Graham Hancock. He's written a book, basically very careful archaeological study, looking at the evidence that early Christians were using psychedelics, and it's connected to the Greek Elysian mysteries, and because the wine, obviously, the
Yeah, there
sacrament.
was stained into the cup. Yeah, I think I remember that episode. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when we had to take the wine and the bread, in the Eucharist, we assumed wine is wine, but wine in those days wasn't what we think of as wine. Wine was a kind of herbal mixture that would have all sorts of different psychoactive things in it. That there was like a brew, it was like a witch's brew. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
so early Christians were, in all probability, taking psychoactive substances and having these experiences. Some of them went the Gnostic route and had this kind of like dark vision, and others went more towards the kind of Neoplatonist, more kind of like non-dual vision. And the kind of church sort of steered away in between, in a way. It's a kind of like mismatch of the two. You've got the kind of Manichaean Gnostic good and light and dark thing, and you've got this kind of non-dual Platonist vibe going as well. But I think part of it is about, and it's also kind of strange how, because obviously the brain is so plastic, and we can train ourselves into seeing the world in either way almost. So the and it is also to do with identity and with who you think you are and what your ego is and what you kind of like attach it to. Because in a way, the heaven trip, it just reminded me when you were talking, some of the reflections were when I woke up. It wasn't just me that woke up, it was everything. It was the trees, it was everything woke up together. And it was basically the understanding that I wasn't a separate thing, just me, and then there's a screen and I observe the world out there. It's that the world, I talk about it as the water level, basically has evolved over millions of years as one thing, with different kind of organisms kind of evolving in different ways and all the rest of it, but it's all one thing. And I was one part of that. So I wasn't just 25 years old or whatever. I was millions of years old, because I am all of the substance of the whole of evolution leading up to me is me, is in me. I'm not something separate from the world that I'm in. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
not only was I like part of it, but I was the highest tip of it. I was the only bit that understood that. If that makes sense.
You were the
Sorry.
newest layer, I would say. Like there's
Yeah,
layers upon layers upon layers, and you're the new top shedding, and then your kids
yeah,
and their kids and their kids will be
yeah,
new layer upon new layer.
yeah. But that this layer, when I woke up, the difference between how I was before, just in the abstract, was that this time I knew that, and I could see and experience that my ego was not me as a separate layer. It was the whole thing. It was the whole thing. I was all of it. You know what I mean?
Do you think like there's a what? Because you're starting to see a lot of this stuff become legal. I know Oregon, for instance, they made everything legal.
Yeah.
That's kind of scary to me, but their crime rate has dropped down. So I'm like, all right, I
Yeah.
can see where the point would hit. But I think it's been made fun of. It's been illegal for so long, especially pot, any type of mushrooms. It's because all the movies make it seem like this, oh, bro, like this whole stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the mentality of the world. Like why Texas doesn't have weed legal is because they don't want the whole society or ever to be a thing of stoners. They think that everybody's going to be, oh, I don't really care, man, walking around with like hippie pants on. It's like, that's
Yeah.
not exactly true, but it raises to the point where anything that is this giant construct when it comes to religion, when it comes to government, when it comes to whatever, it seems like it gives you an answer, but it's never the answer to the question. It's kind of like a stay off for everything, which is like, what is life? The meaning of life? Well, the Lord has the answers.
Mm.
Not really answering my question, but you're giving me something here. It's an aspect of like when you get high like this and it causes you to look inside of yourself and kind of figure out who you are as a person, you start to ask questions. You start to be like, why are there fucking laws that tell us to do this and that and this and that? It's not making any like,
Mm.
wait, I have to pay. There's a death tax. You're telling me when I die, I have to still pay taxes? That doesn't make sense. And you start to question these ideas that we've been running off of. And I feel like that's what the government and that's what society really doesn't like is, hey, we just want you to fall in line a little bit. And it's like, I think everyone is uniquely different. There are people you're going to get along with, and there are people that you're not going to get along with. But
Mm.
there's a way to live in perfect harmony when people stop trying to infringe themselves and change others and work more on themselves. But that is the biggest fear for a lot of people. Like if you ask somebody, I'm going to give you this drug. I'm going to give you this little mushroom, this little thing. You're going to take it, and you're either going to have a really good trip or you're going to have a really bad trip. Either way, you're going to come out a different person than the person that you have spent, let's say 25 years, 30 years being who you are
Mm.
today. It's going to make everything that you think to be right wrong, and the real stuff that is supposed to be right clear in your mind.
Mm. Mm.
That even said in that way where it sounds like majestic or it sounds scary to some people, you're going to have 50-50 of people like, I don't know if I don't know if I'm ready for that. And you'll have some people like, let me see it. I want to know what to me have I built up to be bullshit.
Yeah.
Then you take that. I feel like that should be an option for a lot of people. Like I've heard people take salvia and that was legal that's still legal. Like that shouldn't be legal at all. Like I've heard
Mm.
experience of one of my favorite comedians came on here and he was like, I spent 8 years in a drug trip. Well, that was only 45 seconds in reality. He goes, I lived a whole nother life in a place called Tyler, Texas, working at a fucking apple orchard. And I was like, what? And he goes, and I was in Alaska when I took the drug. He goes, I woke up 45 seconds later after having a seizure, but that drug trip lasted 8 years. I'm like, give that to death
Mm.
row inmates. Give that to people that are like, they're so far gone where it's like, this is what's going to make you realize all your bullshit. But if you
Yeah.
ask the common person, I'm going to give you this mushroom, I'm going to give you this
Yeah. Yeah.
psychedelic, and I want you to, it's going to change everything about your perceptions.
Yeah.
Would you have faith that enough people would take it to where there would be a positive enforcement of that becoming an effective usage tool for when we do get off tracks? Because I hear people talk about psychedelics to them isn't just a one-time experience. It's a thing that they use every couple of months or so, just on the aspect of trying to make sure they're still in tune with what they
Mm.
want to be in tune with the world, not in their own ego again.
Mm. Exactly. I mean, that's kind of the way I'm going now, I think, because in a way, what you're talking about is two different, let's say, modalities. One is the heroic dose thing where everything is just like ripped apart, turned upside down, and the other one is a more manageable dose where you can actually work with it in a more constructive way. So I think a lot of the paranoia and the fear that people have around psychedelics is about the reports of like the drama, the dramatic, like massive, like earth-shattering, life-changing stuff, yeah, which the stereotypes and the caricatures are obviously the hippie, like me going on about cosmic consciousness and all that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, right, okay. So there's the hippie stuff, which turns people off, obviously, because it's like, what's that, you know? And then the other one is the conspiracy theories. So people think I'm just going to start getting into like questioning everything and thinking about all these, you know, what's his name? I can't remember, the QAnon shaman guy, you know, who was all in the press and everything, stormed the Capitol, you know. He was obviously deep into conspiracies, and that was connected to his psychedelic use. So people were like, what? So there are those two associations with conspiracies and with kind of hippie, cosmic consciousness, mystic stuff, which is a turnoff for a lot of people, in that that's not actually going to help me in my life. You know, that might be like amazing or whatever, or, you know, if you're into kind of like sci-fi or crazy stuff, but like, how is that going to help me live? So what I'm interested in, and the model that I've developed in a way, which is also why it's more connected to religion, is about how you can use it to actually build up your character. So it has a kind of moral component, but it also has a psychological component, but it's a way that you can actually understand reality. So you can understand something about the way society works and religious things and your own psychology and all this kind of stuff. But it doesn't spin you out into endless unraveling and deconstructing and questioning and like conspiracies and then cosmic stuff and like you know, and then planets and then Jupiter and this, that, and the other. It's a container that basically helps you to grow psychologically, physically as well, even emotionally, within a context, in a way, the religious context. So the point is it's practical. It's not just about getting high and just, you know, getting loaded. You know, it's about how can you use this in a constructive way, and that's in a way the same as what the therapeutic usage that they're trying out in Imperial College and all this kind of thing with, you know, you go with a guided therapist. So, you know, the therapy model is to help people to deal with their underlying issues and all the rest of it, to then kind of grow as people and to become more, you know, autonomous and self-actualized and that kind of stuff. I'm doing a similar thing, except not in such a narrow therapy kind of thing, which I find a bit constricting, but to have a much broader, wider religious frame that then is also dealing with you know, the whole holistic thing, you know, your mind, body, soul, the whole thing.
An easier way for people to connect to, because there's still there. I mean, there's about 46% of people that aren't really religious, but there's still a large portion that is different religions. So it's easier to tackle more people than a therapist would one-on-one. To me, that scares the shit out of me. If I'm taking drugs and one person is just babying me, I'm going to be like, all right, well, then I obviously took something wrong and I'm going to freak out. But if it's in a group type thing, like group, you know, you need to be in a good place to do it. The biggest question is, do you think the world is ready to start getting into psychedelics, or do you feel like we might be a little bit not there yet or too far gone? Because I feel like everyone is so intensified into everything that's going on around us, and I believe that is a factor of our devices. That is a factor of everything that we're getting so, you know, imprinted into our heads from everything we turn on the television. It's a billion fucking things on there. It's like, that's when you get the conspiracy theorist people. That's because they're getting so much information from all these different things they can't sort out in their head based on what's real and what's fake. In reality, they're looking at their phones as a way to take them off of what's going on around them, and it's showing them all these different types of information, an article on flat earth, an article on this, and then you start questioning things, and that's where the schizophrenia sets in. So I'm wondering if there's a way that we can have like some types of organizations, like a lot of these psychedelic societies that you see on Twitter and stuff like that, but more on real organizations in certain communities in certain states where it's legal, and be like, hey, we're all going to go do acid. We're all going to do these psychedelics, and we're going to sit and we're going to be together. Okay. Like Burning Man. Like, I used to make fun of that, but I see the benefit of it because it's a bunch of people losing all their ties to what the world deems them as worth. And they're just going into the desert and having fun, relaxing. Do I like the whole stereotypical sex thing about it? Not really. But if you're getting high and you want to do that, sure. But more an idea of like, you're coming to grips with, you're losing the worry of the world when it comes to, I have to work a 9 to 5 job, do something I fucking hate just to pay the bills.
I mean, the way that I put it, and I talk about it again in my book,
What's the title of the book for everybody listening?
It's called The Confessions of a Psychedelic Christian.
That's a fucking badass name.
I've got it somewhere. I'll get it in a minute. Yeah, basically one of the things that because that hedonistic kind of image is also problematic with the psychedelics, that people think, oh, it's just about getting loaded and having orgies and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of the kind of associations, the imagery, are not always positive for people who are not necessarily that way inclined and big party heads in the first place. So it's about, how do you make this available to ordinary people to show them how it can actually help them, not kind of take them to extremes of crazy, hippie, cosmic crazy, or conspiracy, or hedonism, or all this kind of stuff, but actually help them. And so what I'm pushing is a different image of psychedelics, not as something that is a intensification of the dream that you're already in, so that it's like even more of a dream, but it's like, whoa, it's fucking crazy, and there's all this kind of shit, and it's psychedelic, basically. It's not about that, it's about waking up. And waking up means removing yourself from the dream that you're already in, if you know what I mean. So all of that about being on the phone and constantly plugged into the matrix, or whatever you want to call it, being constantly, influenced by social conditioning and all this kind of stuff. Part of the work is to be able to kind of remove yourself from that enough to be able to step back. And what the psychedelics does, which is also, there's a lot of research in this, which I'm interested in, is in terms of the way the brain works. So there's this incredible book by a guy called Ian McGilchrist called The Marsh and His Emissary, where he basically looks at the different hemispheres, the way the left and the right hemisphere function. And his thesis is that the left hemisphere is very much about map making, processing information, and that kind of creates, when it becomes too dominant, a kind of virtual reality that you get trapped in, that everything is just basically a representation of everything else. Whereas the right hemisphere is presentational, in the sense that it's basically about just an openness to experience without interpretation and without creating a whole like complicated system of it. So if you think of it, the left hemisphere creates the matrix of your ego, of the society, of the whole world that you're in, that then you navigate as a kind of like second layer map of reality. Whereas the right hemisphere is your direct experience that you have when you like wake up, and it's like, it's the birds are singing, the sky is blue, here I am, that kind of thing. So the point is, if the focus is to try to shift, because our culture, his thesis is that our culture is getting too far towards left hemisphere dominance, which is being exacerbated by the speed of technology, that everyone's getting hooked in, and then everything just becomes a kind of mirror, a hall of mirrors kind of thing. So psychedelics, do you know what I'm saying?
Dude, imagine
Okay, I'll
this.
pause.
Imagine this. I could say this. I swear to God, life is a fucking movie. When you can, if you give it the best trailer in the world, if you explain anything in a certain way, it'll make so much sense. Imagine I could just go, I'm going to give you this thing right here. This is going to do everything it's been doing for ages. It's been able to, all these amazing myths, all these things that we read about, all these biblical references, anything, all these experiences that can just combine into you, that can show you who you truly are and rip down the fabric. But it's a psychedelic. People are like, oh my God, I don't want to take that. But then if I fucking make a technology device that goes in your head and does the same shit with a bunch of wires, and there's a possibility you're going to develop brain tumors or something. Oh, but Elon Musk made it? Oh, I'll take it. It's like, it's just, I got something that does the same thing, and it's been used for thousands of years, but you just want the new thing that's hooked up to your fucking 55-inch plasma. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, already the way that they use it therapeutically with the psilocybin, it's synthesized, and it's in pills, and again, it's made safe, and it's made technological. You know what I mean? And it's all nice and whatever. So again, it's like this thing that we don't trust. We don't trust this kind of like, we don't trust nature. We don't trust what we're given. We have to somehow,
because we've been so disconnected for so long with it.
Exactly.
People think of these homes, they think of this stuff. I'm like, I'm not saying go camping. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, understand that you build up these walls, and then you're also building them up in your head as well. That's totally disconnecting you from everything around you. You go to a store, man, 90% of people don't give a fuck about the person beside them. And at one point, that was me. I didn't care about anybody. But then I started talking to more people, and eventually I'm looking at lives differently. I go, if I see something in the news, someone go, oh, that person's kid just died. Well, if you're a parent and you see, oh, this person's kid just died, that's 20 years. That's however old that kid was. That's life that's completely eliminated from this planet, that is no
Mm-hmm.
longer around anymore, that is not going to continue. That chain dies there. So when I hear
Mm.
people, even older people, if I had a recent family member pass a couple days ago, that's a life that's gone. That's something that is like, and people only hold that for 2 weeks. I've been in
Mm.
near death experiences and stuff, and it lasts two
Mm.
weeks. It's like this whole,
Mm.
like, I fucking love everything.
Mm.
You're grabbing people by
Mm.
like the cheeks, like your
Mm.
grandma would, and shaking them
Mm.
like, I fucking love you.
Yeah, yeah,
It's,
yeah.
but to keep that forever, that's why people maintain with psychedelics and stuff like that, to make sure they're not losing that connection. They're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
losing that.
That's a really good point, and another like stream to go down, because a massive part of the psychedelic experience that's transformative in this good way is to do with mortality, to do with death. It's that thing, I've had that experience. My father died, and I was there, and I went through this whole thing, so it wasn't my near death experience, but and it's like you suddenly wake up to, like, this is my one life. I need to live this life to the full, and suddenly everything becomes really clear. And a big central part of the psychedelic experience, especially when it's full on, like ayahuasca, that takes you like to the dark place. And this is exactly what they talk about in the original Greek and Egyptian mysteries, which is that they had the initiation into death. So you basically are initiated into this death experience, and that they would actually, literally, you would almost die. So a near-death experience would be, you'd be suffocated, you'd be buried. Baptism, you would almost be drowned. Baptism was literally, they would hold you under the water just to the point where you thought that's it, you've gone, you see the light at the end of the tunnel, then you come up, the gasp for air, you've gone through a kind of death rebirth experience. And that death and rebirth is universal in all cultures. It's been that since the beginning, Osiris and the Egyptian thing. And that experience that you have with psychedelics is that you die. Your ego dies. It's like and then you're reborn, like a phoenix or whatever. And when you come back to the world is reborn, and it's all new, and you appreciate everything. And that again is why, in a way, the best fit with religion for me, for the psychedelics, is Christianity, because that's the story. The story is the death and the resurrection, and that is the central mystery of the whole thing. And that is the central mystery of the psychedelic experience. You die to yourself, you're reborn again, and that's a something that then you repeat. So it's not a once in a lifetime thing, which is also what the church maybe misunderstands, that it's all just about the afterlife and you go to heaven after life. No, you can do that every weekend if you want to. You know what I mean? People do that in the jungle. You die and are reborn every weekend. And that is, if you're going to go like, okay, mystical again, go to the East, how many lives do you live? You're reincarnated. It's like you're reborn every, and so you have all of these lives rather than just this one extended life. Does that make sense? So that
How
whole
many
thing.
how many people want to live forever if you ask them? We could make you immortal. It's like, would you want to be immortal if it wasn't the person that you truly are meant to be, if it was the one that society told you to be? That's why when anybody asks me if I would want to live forever, I'm like, fuck no. I was like, the whole
Yeah, yeah.
point of this thing is it's a ride. You don't really know when it's going to be up, but you're hoping you get a good amount of time on it. You know what I mean? It's like, trying to find yourself is the biggest question, and they give you, it seems like, enough days are never enough. There are 365,265 days in a fucking 71-year-old life. So if you look at
Okay.
that, why would you waste a minute of it being unhappy or doing something just because you have to, because, oh, you got to pay? I get it. Bills. It sucks. Life is like that. But at the same time, it doesn't mean it's going to stop you from being who you want to be. You're letting it think that it's going to sit there and suppress you with its thumb. You gotta look inside yourself. I mean, if it takes mushrooms to get you there, if it takes going and doing something you feel like you need to do, it's like people talked a lot about how this pandemic was like, it was the worst thing. It was bad. But also, I heard a lot of good stories out of it where people were like, I fucking found out what I wanted to do with all this time off. And I was like,
Mm.
you're picking it
Yeah,
up. It's better late than never. You know what I mean? There's not really a lateness to it, but I mean, if you're 40,
yeah,
you're 50, and you're figuring out what you want to do now, get started because that's you got to make up for lost time.
yeah, for sure, yeah. I mean that just to pick up on the immortality thing, that's that was another bad trip I had, which is kind of weird.
What, living forever?
Living forever, yeah. I mean, it was just the weird. That was one of my weirdest ones, which was it was ayahuasca. It was way stronger dose. I took a second drink when I shouldn't have. I talk about this in the book as well. And literally, this one, I was gone, boom, like that. I had my bucket. You know, you purge, you vomit. So I like retched, like I roar when I do this. Like lay down, and that was it. I was gone. I forgot everything like that. Didn't know who I was, where I was, anything. Disappeared. And basically, where I ended up was in this void, and all I knew was that I was immortal. That was all I knew. That it would go on forever, and there was no end. And basically, I also knew, kind of, that I was God. That I was God, and I was immortal. I would live forever, and this would go on and on and on and on. And it was nightmarish. It was seriously nightmarish. That when I was little, I remember being 7 and suddenly like realizing I was going to die, and that really freaked me out. It's like, oh my god, I'm going to die, and that was like really heavy in realization for a 7-year-old, or maybe I was younger, I can't remember. But this realization that I would never die was almost worse than that. It was terrifying.
When I found out I was gonna die when I was 6, and I was pretty fucked up for like 20 minutes until someone offered me ice cream, and then I totally forgot about it. Like it just went out the window.
Yeah, that would have solved it. Yeah,
But it's
but
that
it's a good
that
one.
coming to grips thing though. It's like once you look at it like from a young person's or a little kid's perspective, and you go, "Oh my god, I'm going to die." It seems like, "Oh my god, I got to make every minute count." But then once you get older and you realize you're gonna die, it's like, but what have I lived? What have I done
Yeah,
already?
exactly.
And hopefully you can use that to the optimistic side of things where you're like I asked my grandpa, he's probably beginning of his 70s, like 71, 72. And I'm like, you had to leave when you were 16 years old and join the army to go fight in the war. And then at the same time, you had to leave the war because your dad died and you had to take care of your mom and your sister. And he was like, "Yeah, I never really got to do what I wanted to do. I kind of just got married and then started working at the hospital, and I've been there ever since." And I'm like, "So is there anything you're regretting?" He goes, "I regret a lot of things, but everything I've accomplished so far by having a family, having a life, and having the loving moments I've had with you and your siblings and things like that, it's been an experience in itself, and it's one that I might not have wanted at the time, but it was one that I got, and I'm pretty fucking happy, and I wouldn't repeat like
Yeah,
I wouldn't trade that in for anything." And I'm just like,
yeah,
that's a good choice, man. That's a good I just wanted to know what movie you wanted to see, but okay, he gave me
yeah,
that little story and it hurt my heart. Thank you. And he goes, "Well, I just, it's
yeah, yeah,
something you're going to have to come to grips with in life when you look back on it. You're going to
yeah,
get
yeah,
to a point where you're hopefully at an old age." And he goes, "You're going to look back on your life and wonder how many moments would you replace for something else, and you realize you wouldn't trade any of that in for the world."
yeah, yeah. No, that's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, that's also the kind of paradox of this kind of thing, because I had that, when my father was dying, and towards the end, every breath, he took, he had a thing called apnea or something like that, where you basically struggle to kind of take the next breath. So
Hmm.
every breath, it got slower and slower. This is right at the end. So you never knew if you'd take another one. It's like you're waiting. There's a gap. Next breath, next breath. Is it going to come? And then he breathes. You could count them, and then finally, there wasn't a next breath, and that was it. That was the end, and that was the end. And you realize that there are a certain number of breaths. You could count them like you counted the days. There are a certain number of breaths that you will take in this life, and that we just don't kind of appreciate that there is an end. And then when you realize there is an end, it's not the fear of the death, it's the fear of not having lived, as you say. But then the paradox is that the more that you worry about that, like afterwards, I was in a bit of a state, obviously, the pressure that you have to live the perfect life, that you have to live it to its full, and do what who you really are in your essence, and not follow what the society says, and don't, get married or whatever. The pressure to do that takes away from the enjoyment of being alive. Do you know what I mean? So there's it's this weird paradox, which is about, can you appreciate, enjoy, accept your life as it is, as it unfolds, not and not kind of like just sleep through it, basically, but without kind of beating yourself over the back the whole time that you're not living the best life ever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's a weird one, but for sure that's a beautiful story. The looking back on your life, that's the other classic thing. On your deathbed, what do you regret? What will it be? It won't be that you didn't get that promotion, or all these kind of like things that you kind of worry about in your life. It's like, did I live? How many moments in my life were really meaningful, like with other people, relationships, like you mentioned, is loving you, and with the world. You know what I mean? It's like, how many of those breaths was I present and alive, and how many was I just in a dreamland, just like in the ego.
It really woke me up, like, because I was asking him, I was like, how weird is it to see, like, you watched us grow up, basically, like, from birth to how I am now. It's like when I come over to you and I'm like, I'm taller than you now, and he goes, honestly, he goes, if I looked and I go, all the where I could have been in my career, where I could have been doing if I wanted to, be working on fancy cars, if I wanted my own garage shop, and just choose not to have a family. And but he goes, the best feeling of the world is when I see you bust through the door, you or your cousins bust through the door. Next thing you know, I'm getting a hug from you guys. And it's 20 years or 23 years, whatever you want to call it, of life that's standing in front of me. Like seeing that whole thing, he goes, those are fucking memories where I can remember things you can't remember, but that are just every time I see you, I see that vision of you. And I'm like, he's like, that's worth to me. That's what the real money is. Yeah, I could be living in a nice ass house or somebody else, but I love my home, and I love the people, because that's what makes it a home, is the people that fill it. And I'm like, fucking damn, man.
Yeah.
Trying to get to the movies. It starts at 8:30, and he's like, let me be emotional. And I'm like, all right, like, okay. But it is something that is beautiful when you really look at that aspect of things. People that talk about, like, like I asked my buddy the other day for episode 700 of mine, I was like, you work so hard to support your family. He goes, but you never want to get to that point where you come home and you're a foreign in your own home. You're estranged to your family. They don't know who you are because you've never had that experience to sit down with them.
Yeah.
That's the fucking scariest thing in the world for a lot of people.
Yeah. That is. And that's, again, put your finger on it again. Brilliant. That's what it's all about, ultimately. And again, I would say psychedelics and religion point in that direction, that which way are we going? In your life, are you going somewhere where you are becoming a stranger to everyone, even if you are like president, or if you have power, or you have the biggest house and swimming pool, whatever? Are you a stranger to your family, to the people around you, to the community? Are you a stranger to the trees, to nature? Or are you like together? And ultimately, what does that mean, being together? I mean, without being too corny, it's love, and that's the essence, again, of the whole of the religious tradition. God is love. This is also what psychedelics teach, and ayahuasca is really strong on that. It's like, it's painful often, because it kind of confronts you with the ways that you're kind of like you're avoiding that love, because you retreat, and there is always that kind of dance, between people. But ultimately, that's what's at the core of this, which is, and on a social level, you can also see it in terms of different cultures. Which way are we going? Are we going towards more togetherness? Are we going in that direction of love, or are we going separating, distrust, hatred, paranoia, ego, all this other stuff? History has its twists and turns. Sometimes it goes that way, sometimes it goes this way. And all that kind of religion can do, and psychedelics is a kind of prop for that, is to try as much as possible to kind of massage it in the direction of love, and away from, you know, selfishness and ego and power trips and all this kind of stuff, and division and, you know, projection, and, you know, the whole complex, crazy world that comes up, you know, in hell, ultimately, you know, that kind of hell mentality, when the mind is there, you know, and there's no escape. And yeah.
That's beautiful, dude. And I want to make sure we can promote the book here at the ending. So can you tell people where they can find your book, the title of the book, everything, where, you know, all your links and everything? I'll make sure I put in the description as well, but I want to make sure people can hear you say it to make sure, you know, they can look it up too.
Yeah, let me just get a copy, shall I?
Yeah.
1 sec. Here it is. Can you see that?
The Confessions of a Psychedelic Christian. I mean, if that that's the name of a movie, dude.
Yeah. Well, that's possibly in the pipeline. It would make a good film, yeah, for sure. But yeah, so that's the book, Confessions of a Psychedelic Christian. It's on Amazon. So at the moment it's self-published, but I'm trying to get interest so I can get a mainstream publisher, because there's no obviously promotion or anything like that. The link is on my Twitter as well, which is Seb Gaete. That's my name.
I'll make sure I retweet that too, because I mean, that's definitely a book I'm gonna have to get picked up. If I order that, can I get a signed copy, like a little message in there, like, Rob, thanks so much for having the same. Well, actually, your name is my middle name.
Yeah. I can send you a signed copy, no problem. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. There we are. So that's in a way it's about my experiences, but the main reason I wrote it was to build, as I mentioned before, the system that can help to kind of to organize psychedelic experiences, not just psychedelic. It can be just any, you know, and that's kind of what the symbol is referring to, which is also partly the reason that it's a Christian thing, because if you can see, you see that or not?
It looks like stained glass.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's stained glass, but it's a kind of cross. It's a double cross. Yeah. So the basic idea, you can see there's 6 segments in the circle. This is based on the Tibetan Wheel of Life. I don't know if you're aware of the Tibetan Wheel of Life. Anyway, the idea is that each region is a different realm of being that you can be reincarnated into, yeah? So, or into different ego states. So when we talk about heaven and hell, obviously heaven is up here and hell is down there. But in the Tibetan tradition, there's also these other 4 realms that you can be in, which is the fighting spirits, the asuras, the human realm, the animal realm, and the hungry ghost realm. Anyway, I basically modernized the whole system, and the point is that that model for me is a perfect representation of what I talk about, the left hemisphere, that we get stuck in this wheel that we can't escape from, that we're basically moving from one state to the other. So the whole point of the cross is it gives you somewhere else to go. You kind of flip from that way of thinking to the right hemisphere, which is based on the opposite archetypes, let's say. And those are mantras, but they're also in the body. So it's kind of like fixed. You know, when you cross yourself?
Yeah.
This is the cross. Normally is up here.
Yeah.
But in Tantra, these are chakras. Yeah, you know about chakras.
Yeah,
so
chakra
this is the
points,
third eye, the heart chakra, and these are like minor chakras. If you think about that in terms of chakras, you're missing out the bottom chakras. It's very top heavy.
Yeah.
Stops at the heart. Whereas when you work with Tantra, you go right down to the sacral, to the root chakra. So the double cross is that you don't just stop at the heart, you go down to the sacral chakra, you do the hips, and so it's a double cross. And the double cross represents these archetypes that are then embodied. So the whole thing is about that it's almost like I mean, again, this is why the psychedelics help, because all of this stuff isn't just intellectual in your head. It's not just ideas. They're things that get kind of rooted in your body as kind of energetic kind of thing.
It's beautiful, dude.
That makes sense.
It does. I mean, it's a different perspective. A lot of people probably never even heard that before. I'll make sure I link everything in the description, man. Seriously, Sebastian, it's been a wonderful pleasure talking to you, man. I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna retweet your book literally right after this. Definitely got to pick myself up a copy, dude. I'm excited to hear about some of these experiences more in depth. But thank you so much for being on this episode of Out of the Blank podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode.